Sure. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. It's Kate Barron with the Inland Empire Apex chapter. And I want to quickly introduce our guest speaker today. It's Lisa Anderson. She's the president of the LMA Consulting Group in the Apex Inland Empire chapter, and she's known as a manufacturing business transformer and is a leading expert in bridging the gap between supply chain strategy and execution to dramatically improve service levels, accelerate cash flow, and maximize profits. Lisa is also an author of the forthcoming book called The Amazon Effect. She's been recognized as the 16th most influential supply chain influencer by SAP. She's named a top 100 supply chain blogger worldwide by the Supply Chain OPZ. And she's been quoted in the Wall Street Journal, ABC News, and the LA Times. So with that, Lisa, go ahead and get going with the presentation. I know you wanted to mention a few things about some classes that are coming up in the Inland Empire. So with that, go forward.
Okay, well, welcome. I wanted to start off with the one hat of my role as president of Apex Inland Empire, and then we'll move to my other hat with the webinar presentation. So I'm excited that everyone has joined us today. Sales, inventory, and operations planning is absolutely a hot topic. I mean, if there's one thing that I find that can transform organizations to achieve results, this is definitely one of the keys to that success. So with that said, the Apex Inland Empire chapter offers programs and education. I wanted to highlight a couple of things that I think are very exciting and that I wanted to make sure that folks were aware of and signed up for. So first is, from a program perspective, we have our next executive panel and networking symposium on the theme of technology and the use of technology for manufacturers and distributors, and it's going to be on November 4th. So save that date out there. And we have some really exciting panel members that we're going to be sharing with you soon. And then from the education side, we have several classes coming up, but I'd like to highlight two of them. So the first one is the Basics of Supply Chain class, which is it's the foundation class to the CPIM certification. The CPIM certification is well known in the industry. Executive recruiters and HR professionals are always asking us to recommend folks for them that have this certification. It's extremely well known. With that said, we're reconfiguring it so it's faster, because everything these days, which we'll talk about in today's presentation, is about quickness. I mean, the Amazon Effect, my book that Kate mentioned, is about that. You know, everybody wants everything yesterday and figure it out what we need for us, type of thing. So from that point of view, to get the basics, to get the CPIM certification more quickly, they're condensing it into two larger modules. Those larger modules are going to be still covering the same material, but it'll be quicker, which means that you'll need to do more to keep up with the class. But the first module, the basics class, is largely staying the same. However, it is going to go up substantially in price with the new reconfiguration, because it's now half of the certification. So we have a unique opportunity to get in on our basics class, which will be held in July, and get in now. That's going to be one of your last opportunities before the reconfiguration, and you can continue on with the second module as it's reconfigured. So I wanted to highlight that. So it's on our website at www.apex-ie.org. The second class I'll tell you about briefly is the CLTD, which is the Certified Logistics, Transportation, and Distribution Professional. It's extremely prevalent in the Inland Empire, and in Southern California we're #1 in in supply chain and logistics. I just got finished from speaking at the Future Ports annual conference yesterday on a panel, and it's, there's so much going on in that field that this certification is highly desired for logistics professionals. And we are going to kick off a class in the fall. We are debating about whether to host it on Saturdays or on a weeknight. We have students that are interested in both. But if you're interested in taking that class, please contact us through our, our website. You can, we're going to be sending out the revised date shortly. You can sign up for the class that way, or you can send us an email. So with that said, I will move on to sales and operations planning. So let's see if I can make their controls work. Okay, here we go. So what we'll cover today is what is SIOP, Sales Inventory Operations Planning, why focus on it, strategies for success, and then, I'm going to make it interactive, assuming that you'll participate with me. If not, I'll go through a couple of case studies, but I have to say, it's much more entertaining if we can have a good discussion and be interactive than it is for me to drone on about these topics. I'll do my best to make it interesting without the other side of the conversation until that point. So what is SIOP? SIOP stands for Sales, Inventory, and Operations Planning. It's sometimes known as S&OP, so Sales and Operations Planning. I ask my clients, because one of the things I focus on in consulting is sales and operations planning, and I'm known for helping clients implement it and make it happen. And so I always ask my clients, well, what would you like to call it? Because it's up to you. Either way, it's the same thing. And they unanimously, they have all selected SIOP because no one wants to forget the importance of inventory, which I happen to agree. It's just less known. So with that said, that's what SIOP is. And this diagram kind of says it all. You'll see three, we'll just make this easy. At the high level, we're just needed to align our demand, our customer needs, with our supply. Like how we satisfy that demand. It sounds really quite simple, actually. However, it's definitely not simple. I can tell you that I've yet to come across a client that didn't have some opportunities in aligning demand and supply. Another way to look at this, it's not just a technical topic about aligning demand and supply, not the value. The real value is in aligning all the people in all the functions of the organization on one, plan. And that's how many of us have had the situation where sales is not on the same as pages operations, because maybe they're thinking, I need to increase sales, and they accept orders, operations is not ready to handle them, and everyone's frustrated, or R&D comes up with this product that they think is fabulous, and we don't have the time to prepare in operations, or finance wants us to reduce inventory levels because they would like to have more cash flow, and that causes a problem for sales, or if we don't have the back end straightened out, and marketing and purchasing, and everyone's on their separate pages. So what I find is, although most clients, think it's a technical topic when they bring me in, the vast majority of the results stem from getting all these stakeholders on the same page. Really sounds quite simple. It's just not simple in reality to do. And then last but not least, it is very helpful if you're thinking about the supply chain from birth to earth, if you will, or the end-to-end supply chain, to have your customers and your suppliers all working, rowing in the same direction, if you will, because I see, I can't think of any company that's 100% aligned, but basically if we could get our partners, and suppliers being the broad term, to include logistics partners, bankers. I mean, who cares about a banker, right? But, they are supplying us with money. So how do we make sure all these folks are on the same page? And they're not even working for us. So we have to think through that. That's what SIOP is. Now, how does it fit? It kind of fits in between everything else. That's why it's not the easiest thing to do. So if you look at this diagram, we have the customer inputs into the process, the backlog or whatever we call it. Lots of my clients call it different things. customer contracts and forecasts, which you may or may not have. You at least have ship history. Undoubtedly, you have ship history. Sales forecast, guideline charts. I mean, that's an aerospace terminology. So new program schedules. Most likely, somewhere along the line, you have a new program or a new product. One would hope. Otherwise, you probably will be challenged growing your business over the long term. You may have returns and repairs, which always complicate matters. You may have like MRO. You may have spare orders, for example, in the aerospace industry. Those are always complicated, to say the least, in terms of figuring out when they might show up. And you probably know something about your market, hopefully. Somebody does. You know, like what's happening. Is the market in general growing, declining, or what? That doesn't necessarily mean you'll grow if the market's growing. That would be nice, but if you're not servicing your customers effectively, you very well may not grow. But it's still helpful to understand what the market's doing, because that's one of the inputs into the process. So that's the inputs. Then we have SIOP, which is looking at all those inputs, and it's also looking at the top boxes here: customer service, sales and marketing, finance, engineering, and the bottom boxes. So, you know, like how do we execute all this? Production, material planning, inventory management, procurement. So we're basically coordinating between all those stakeholders, and then we turn all that stuff into our outputs. And our outputs are, what are we going to produce? That would be helpful to know. And I mean, what are we going to produce over the long term? The SIOP goes over the long term, and I'll explain that further. Tomorrow is not enough information. Purchasing plan, so that would be helpful to know, like what are we going to be purchasing from our suppliers? Perhaps we could tell our key suppliers, you know, the ballpark volume so that they can be prepared. It's one of the things that definitely goes awry in many cases. The inventory investment plan, that's kind of important too, because that would be helpful to know, so you know if you have to have financing. Maybe you'll know how much money you'll have to invest in new equipment, new people, current people in training. How about APICS education, for example? So, you know, the inventory investment plan. Integrated sales plan, meaning like what are you going to sell, your budgets, your sales budgets. And really, I didn't list this here, and I should, but you can, in essence, calculate your margins. Many of my clients have turned this into basically a business planning process where they're knowing in advance what they're going to sell, how they're going to produce it, what kind of inventory they're going to have, and what their margins are. Now, does any of that ever happen? 100%? Never. But they have the high-level information that makes them well-informed to be able to make good decisions and think about it strategically, which they will gain substantial results from, which is probably coming up very soon. Next. So that's what SIOP is. Why care about it? Like, there are so many priorities in companies. If there's one thing in common, I was just at a prospective client this morning, and we talked about this. There's at least 100 priorities in every company I go to, because, you know, in manufacturing and distribution, something is happening every day, and something new is happening that we didn't think about yesterday. Some customer changes, the supplier has a problem. Ports, you know, go on strike, or something we can't predict at all. There's an earthquake, or I don't really like that example. Let's use a tornado, because that's less likely to happen in California, at least. So it's you know, you never know what's going to happen. So you have to think about what are the key priorities that are going to really matter for your business. So the reason that SIOP should rise to somewhere in the top, most likely, with most of my clients, I find this is true, is that it achieves vast results if done properly. The methodology alone will not accomplish a thing. It's very similar to Lean, not in terms of what you do, but Lean is a tool, SIOP is a tool. If you go about thinking, hey, I'm going to run a couple of Kaizens and everything will be fixed, nothing's going to change for the long term at all. If nothing else, you might even go backwards. And that's true for SIOP too, because I've seen people get crazy about all the data and they make no decisions, and they are worse off than they were in the first place. If nothing else, they diverted focus from elsewhere. So why should we dedicate the resources to SIOP? Because that's really what we're saying here. And these three categories are why. So customer experience. Well, we want to grow our business. That's a really good reason to focus on SIOP. If you're not growing, you're declining. So you have a choice here, and I'd prefer to choose growth. The other things that go into customer experience, which is many of the reasons my clients ask for this, is service levels. Maybe their service levels aren't as good as their customers would desire. Could be because in some cases they cut back in the recession, which seems like it was a long time ago now, but yet they still are struggling to have the right things in the right places. Could be that their customers are demanding more. That wouldn't be surprising since the Amazon effect has taken place. So customers are demanding more and they have stricter requirements, and we have to find a way to keep our service levels high if we plan to keep them. And so this really is helpful in turning service levels around, or maintaining them and improving them. I've multiple times been working with clients that were in the 60s or even lower, but we'll just stick with that because that's scary enough. And we have brought their service levels up to 98% or whatever it was that their goal was from a customer standpoint, because 100% service level would be cost prohibitive, but somewhere between 95 and 99 is would be, depending upon the type of customer, possibly the goal. So that's been a frequent result. Turnaround time. This is like, if there's one thing that every customer does not have, it is time. They want you to deliver it same day, next day. It depends on the industry. I work a lot with three broad categories because I focus a lot on Southern California. It's what's here, but it's who I work with. So aerospace, well, their lead times in general are quite long. So, a 13-week lead time would not be uncommon, and, it can range from 6 weeks to like a year, and it depends on what type of aerospace. But even in that type of lengthy lead time environment, lead times are getting slashed. Customers want it faster, and if you can provide it to them, they will get it from you. So there's a big, that's one area. The next area is building products, which I call things like what goes into building a house or commercial building, like windows and doors, and like piping under the house, that kind of thing. Also what goes inside of it could be like furniture or, sinks or who knows what. So all sorts of building products type of thing. One would think that having a sink would be something you could think of in advance. I would think so. However, I can tell you, out of all of my clients, building products are the absolute, I don't know if I want to call them crazy, but the absolute madmen when it comes to lead time. So like same-day lead time is the goal in most of my clients. Next day lead time is acceptable, and beyond that is not terribly desired. So, like a quick turnaround, 24 to 48 hours is absolutely needed in that industry. And then food, one would think food would have the quickest of all, but, like I said, strangely enough, building products has a stronger desire for a quicker lead time most of the time. So in food, it's short too, obviously, because you don't want to have some food spoils. Well, most of it does eventually, but it could be 24 hours to a couple of weeks. It depends on the what you're making and what you're doing. But anyway, it's all across the board in all of these categories, and there's consumer products too, and of course they're being cut back. I would say it's being cut back by 50%. So customers are expecting a much quicker delivery. That is not easy to accomplish. So that's one of the other key areas here. And then customer loyalty. So, how do you go over and beyond with service? So if that wasn't enough, then we should be thinking about profitability and cash flow. Who doesn't want that, after all? But one of the key areas of SIOP helps you improve your inventory turns. It's absolutely one of the things that I was called about most frequently prior to the recession and during the recession. Less frequently now because there's so much focus on the customer. I mean, the Amazon effect has really driven the customer. Although I still get calls. I mean, no one wants to carry more inventory than they need to. But that's $1 tied up in inventory is $1 that you cannot spend somewhere else. Margins, very important, because if we can make more money for each item we sell, that's rather important, and that's a direct result of SIOP also. One of the clients I worked with, our focus was on improving service and growing business with SIOP. However, by kind of as a byproduct, we also achieved a 5% improvement in margins, which is a nice byproduct to have. So margins oftentimes are improved, which, the areas underneath it are related, but I list them anyway. It's improved efficiencies, improved productivity, of course, that's all part of margins as a higher category. Improved accuracy, all of which is desirable, of course. And then the third area is morale. And you could call it what you want. Happy employees would be desired. Happy customers also. Actually, happy suppliers too. What we're talking about end-to-end supply chain happy people. So SIOP does some amazing things. And of course, looking at it like just we're going to implement SIOP and everything will be solved is not going to cut it, because you have to make this a cultural change, etc. But these results have absolutely happened every time I've worked with clients, and that is improved collaboration, which is great, much better than fighting. The second one is one that I found, I didn't know this would happen in my early SIOP projects, but it was a nice finding, and it happens frequently, like every other time I've done it since then. So, which has been many years. So, and that's that the roadblocks surface naturally, which sounds like, okay, this is actually very important, because before I get there, they may not be fighting, like sales and operations, R&D, purchasing. They may not necessarily be fighting, but they're all on their own page, doing their own thing. And so operations, there's a roadblock or a bottleneck somewhere, and like that particular area is working on it, but no one else cares or knows anything about what they're doing and how it relates to that bottleneck. So they struggle and maybe make a little progress, and it's kind of a never-ending process, and eventually everyone gets frustrated and with each other, and we'll leave it at that. It depends on the company. So instead of that, where everyone's kind of frustrated and say, that Joe, he's no good because he just doesn't want to do what I need him to do in order to solve my issue, because Joe's working in his silo. And it's not Joe's problem, because his goals are related to what he's doing. He's not really supposed to care about your problems. However, from a business point of view, we care a lot, because those problems relate directly to those results on the left-hand side of the page, and it makes everyone unhappy. So through the process, what happens is these roadblocks and bottlenecks emerge on their own. So now it's just part of the process. It's not Joe's problem or Sally's problem. It's just, this is the next issue we need to deal with, because it's as you go through a continually improving process, and you align all these different folks and the customers and the suppliers and the demand and the supply, roadblocks are going to surface. There's no way they're not going to. So as they surface, if we're all aligned on working on the problem together and have decided what we're going to do that will, so Joe's no longer going to be in trouble, or, maybe his salary or his bonus will be affected, he's not going to be in trouble for supporting what we need to do to be successful overall. So it goes a long way to making things much more pleasant. And then also we have one plan, which is another big benefit, and then joint accountability. So we're working together instead of separately. So I'll go into a couple of strategies for success, and then I thought we should it's much more interesting to answer questions, so that I don't want anyone falling asleep here. So strategies for success, we'll start with the demand, because you really need to start with the customer, because after all, you can do anything you want to do and be the most efficient, best manufacturing operation in the world, and it makes no bit of difference if your customers are not happy because you're giving them something they don't need, you're not giving it to them when they need it. Even if you're doing the best, you have no idea that's what they want. It doesn't work. So you have to start with the demand side of things. So, really there's several tips here, and I have lots and lots of articles on this on my websites, and I could send you links to them if you're interested. So I can't go into every one of these because it would be like a 12-hour webinar, which would be very long. So, but the secret of historical forecast is that the funny thing is, history does tend to repeat itself. It's amazing how predictable things are, even though they seem like they're not, on a daily basis. So starting with a historical forecast and statistical forecast can be a great base. Don't shy away from that, because that can be just a fabulous base. Then you want to worry about, don't worry about all these details. I tell you what, you would not be alone. A lot of my clients love to get sidetracked in details, because I make that sound like I wouldn't either, but I would. It's very natural. You get, you're like, oh wow, I didn't know about this, and you're suddenly so involved in this detail that you miss what's going on around you. So you have to think in high-level categories and groupings of items, product lines kind of thing, and groups of customers. So you don't worry about specific SKUs and all these exceptions that, believe me, we worry a lot about, and it's like, well, this isn't going to work because this exception. Don't worry about it. Just don't worry about it. Try it, and then believe me, it'll all work out fine. So we work with high-level items. You have to think about items. Not every item is created alike. So is it consistent or sporadic? There's different strategies. You want to talk to your customers. It's really not rocket science. You want to talk to your salespeople. Yes, they may tell you things that are never going to happen, but they'll give you some really good advice as well. So you just have to think about what things to include, and getting more information rather than less is a good thing. Doesn't mean you have to use it all in what you actually end up doing. That's the point of SIOP. Remember your market, because if you have this great forecast but it makes no sense whatsoever with what your market is doing, something might be awry. Unless you're gaining customers like mad, and that's why it doesn't correlate, or maybe you're tanking. I don't know, but basically you should pay attention to what's going on in your market, because there's something going on. Ask for demand data into the supply chain, meaning that you don't want to use your customer's perception of what they need and what they really want you to provide, because they're not sure, and they feel like they might need extra because they're hedging. And so the better information you can get, that's really what's happening, what's being sold by your customer, or what's being used. Like in aerospace, just because it's an easy thing to understand, they're building a plane, so they might be using they're using your product in the plane. Well, understanding what that usage rate is better than understanding what their systems think on a weekly basis, because their systems are no better than ours, and they move up and down and all over the place when they get freaked out by anomalies. So getting market data or getting demand data is good. Managing exceptions. Don't worry about all these. Don't worry about 1,000 details. Worry about the key exceptions. Don't forget your outliers, like your new products, because they can really derail things if you aren't paying attention. So those are there's a lot. Like I said, every one of these topics we could talk about for a few hours. So these are highlights. The I category, inventory strategy or inventory. Here's where you got to be thinking about make versus buy. What are you outsourcing? What should you be outsourcing? What should you be bringing back? Or what should you be bringing closer to your manufacturing operation? Or what kind of strategies can you use so that you have what you need when you need it? And is it core or not core? So there's a lot of things to think about with make versus buy. Do you have different strategies in place for make to order Depends on your business. In aerospace, typically speaking, as an example, they always think they're make to order. And they might be, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't be looking further out. You might need to be make to demand, which is my twist on make to stock, because make to stock, typically speaking, I don't want extra stock. I don't want to like have things tied up in inventory, but I do want to make to my demand plan. So that's what that means. You might be configured to order. So like a windows and doors manufacturer as an example. Like, do I want to have red, blue? What kind of color should we be having? What kind of size do I want? You know, there's like all sorts of things to configure. Or it could be engineered to order, where you don't really know what you're going to need in advance as far as what can be engineered. But you still have, believe me, as much as everyone thinks, well, it can't be done. We can't figure this out. We can. It's just at the high level, it can be done. And that getting those high level trends and information will go a long, long way to achieving those results. So you got to think about your strategies, and it really doesn't have to be that you're one or the other. In building products, for example, there are a lot of times configure to order, a combination of configure to order and make to order and make to demand plan, which some of these are going to turn into Kanbans. That's going to be, you know, like in a way the make to demand plan if you have consistent volume. So there's a lot of concepts you can integrate here. Do you have strategic inventory requirements? You might, because you may be trying to gain a certain customer, and to gain that customer you have to position inventory in a certain place, and you don't want to miss those requirements. You may have event-driven inventory requirements. Most of my customers, some of what I consult on seems like it would be apparent, but it's not apparent. And one of those things is we probably will close down over the holidays. Or even if we don't close down over the holidays, which most of my clients really don't close down, but they close down for a couple of days, probably a lot of people are going to take vacation. So how are we going to get the product to our customers, because they aren't caring if we're on vacation? They want their product. So, you know, have we planned for this to happen? Because after all, we do know when the holidays occur. And then, you know, there's vendor managed inventory and collaborative customer programs going on as well, where that could be going on, and that can be a whole, that can be a real benefit, but that would be a whole different webinar. Supply planning from operations. There are, so capacity hotspots. What I mean by that is I see a lot of my clients going down into deep diving and detail and getting all caught up in capacity planning and never getting to any answers that allow them to make decisions, which is not great. So instead of doing that, we want to just look at what sometimes is called rough cut capacity. If you're in our APEX classes, you'll certainly learn about that. But in essence, what the idea here is, which of your machinery, it could be buildings, it could be other things, but let's just stick with machinery. Which of your machinery and tools are most critical to getting your products out on time? And given the workload you have, which ones are most important? Because although you may have this machine and you spend all this time figuring out what your capacity is and what your volume translates into what capacity, you know, what do you need to make, and can you make it all? If it's very irrelevant to the operation and it's not delaying you from reducing your lead time, you have plenty of uptime available on your machine, like, who cares? Don't worry about it right now. We just got to worry about the ones that are key to the process. So, you know, look at your capacity hotspots. And that is oftentimes a big benefit. And you don't, if you have an ERP system that can help you with this process, it's valuable. Most ERP systems you can achieve, and, you know, some information anyway that you can utilize in the process. But don't get all carried away and thinking you have to change ERP systems or upgrade or do some other things to get capacity data, because you don't. Not for PSYOP. You can, there's a way to get the information at the right level of information, or the category kind of thinking, you know, product line thinking or machine group thinking, you can get something. Even in the worst situation I've worked with, which of course I wouldn't name, we have a system that wouldn't really give us anything, and really we didn't know what was going on. We were able to figure out for the key areas what we really needed manually, and that's just fine with data that we were able to extract. I mean, we had the decision information for making decisions that would benefit the business. That's all that really matters. And then you want to highlight staffing shortages, because that oftentimes happens, and it's because if you look at it from the high level, it looks like, wow, you have plenty of people. What is your problem anyway? And that would happen all the time anyway. When I was the vice president of operations, even if I didn't have plenty of people to run the machineries, everyone always, like board members, would always question labor costs. Even though labor wasn't a very large component at all of my cost structure, every meeting they would ask me about labor costs. So, you know, it's always a hot spot topic, if you will. But the SIOP process gives you the background you need to be able to fight for, if necessary, or make the right decisions in the first place to hiring the right people or moving them around, because you may have enough people, but you just don't have them where you need them. You may not have them where you need them with the right skills. That's another problem. So, you know, it highlights what you need to do for staffing. It also will highlight some cross-training needs. For example, if you don't have the types of people you need to run certain pieces of machinery or certain products, it's never that we get into all these arguments and are frustrated with each other because it's obvious that we have too many people. Usually not that. It's that we don't have the people we need with the skills we need at the time we need them for the customer's orders when they seem to want to place them. That's the problem. And we don't know when any of that's going to happen in the first place. So if, you know, Joe has been working there for 30 years and knows how to make everything we make, but the rest of the people that are in his area can make like half the items and, you know, half of them, but not all of them make the same one. You know, the order is going to come in exactly when Joe's not there, of course, or he's gone on a 2-week vacation, and we want to be able to make sure that we have a process to back that up. So that's that. We want to understand key supplier constraints, because we can easily screw things up. We can think we're just doing so great, and our suppliers have no idea what we're doing, and they are just not able to perform. And we think, oh, we're gonna get them in shape and, you know, benchmark them and, you know, give them data. Well, on their performance, none of that's going to matter if they had no idea what we were thinking of doing before we did it. So we have to like provide them with some information about what's happening in the future, and, you know, make sure that they're set up as well. Shipping, staffing, logistics networks. I mean, there's, you know, a lot we can go into in terms of supply chain networks, and you know, this process can also help you understand where to locate facilities, how many you should need, that kind of thing. It's not going to do all of that, but it's going to give you the base, and it's a STEM for doing that type of work. It's I oftentimes couple the two together in my project. And then from the planning side, in the end, we'll have what are we going to sell, or what are we going to transfer to another facility, or what kind of demand do we have, because maybe not all of our demand is being sold. It could be given away. We could have samples. That's important too if we want to grow business. So what are we going to sell? What are our demand forecasts really? But from the financial side, what is our sales budget? Then from the next piece of this is what we can start forecasting what our cost of goods sold is going to be. As we know what we're likely going to have to start doing in terms of staffing, machinery, buildings, all these other things, you can get a better prediction of what your cost of goods sold is going to be. Certainly, you know, if you have what your demand is likely to be, and you have what you're planning to make and purchase, if you will. Like I said, it's never going to go 100% correct, but if you have the high-level categories, you're going to come within a reasonable tolerance, or you should be adjusting the process as you go. And within I don't know, within 6 months to a year, you should be getting to the point where you're getting good at this and are within a reasonable tolerance at a high level. You're going to be able to predict what your inventory is, which means you'll know how much cash you need, which is also really important. And then you'll be able to get margin estimates and even tie it together with your budget. So this process goes on a monthly rolling process, which means you cannot just do this once and then think it's all solved, because it just won't work. It'll be great for that month, but then everything's going to fall apart. So it has to be a monthly process. These are not all steps where you have to have meetings, so don't get worried. Step 1, data gathering. No meetings are typically required. It's, you're usually getting data from your system to figure out what your forecast is and what your capacity data is, that kind of thing. The second step, which is a meeting, typically, is your demand planning meeting, where you're talking to, you're reviewing like what your base forecast might be based on just historical data. And you're getting feedback, well, this is kind of strange. This product line is going up by 6%, and we didn't know it was, is that going to continue? Salespeople are much better off answering questions like that than they are, what do you think your forecast is going to be? They don't know. Usually what their forecast is going to be. It's not what their skill is figuring out, all this data crunching that we do. But they can answer questions. Yes, I think I'm losing this business. I'm gaining this business. This customer is transitioning from here to here. I have a promotion going on my food, on my frozen foods at Whole Foods this week, and so yes, that makes good sense that we would be selling through that in our process. So they can tell you those things. So from the demand planning meeting gets that kind of feedback together. Then you turn it into, what does that mean? So this demand means what? We need how many people where, typically speaking. Like I said, these are high-level things. So how many people within larger categories of machines, perhaps. What do we need in terms of people, in terms of machinery, which of course should not come up frequently, that you have to purchase machines every other day. It's not usual. But it will alert you when you have challenges, and you can usually address them in many different ways, including purchasing machines. So, it'll tell you what you need, and it'll also tell you like it'll translate it into your materials, or you can translate it into your material requirements so that you can get a picture of what your suppliers need to do. So step 3, then pre-meeting just means you prepare it all, and that's not usually a meeting. The supply meeting is usually a meeting where you get the supply folks, operations, purchasing, new products, all those people together on one page, and you talk about the supply side. Pre-meeting is more of a development step where the executive meeting is where you get all of the heads of each department, the executive leaders, the SIOP leader, and maybe other key resources or partners together once a month, and you go through your demand and your supply plans and your highlights of them, and what does that mean? What kind of decisions do we need to make? And it gives people a voice. They know that if they bring up issues in these demand meetings or supply meetings, that it will be addressed one way or another. At least they'll get feedback on what's happening. Or it could be that they bring up a really good point that the executive team decides they need to hire, or whatever the decision might be. That kind of gives you an idea. It's got to be done on a monthly basis. So you don't have to regenerate everything every month. It's more exception-based, but it's got to be a monthly process where you refresh things, and you go out usually 1 year to, 1 year to 2 years is typical for the majority of businesses. Some arrows has to go out like 5 years because they have to be far out, but usually 1 to 2 years covers the vast majority of business types. And besides, who really knows what's going to happen 5 years from now anyway? So it's pretty uncommon. And then implementation. A couple of highlights here that I want to go through is just how, SIOP doesn't fail in formulation. This is true for everything. It fails in implementation. It's like you have to pay attention to all the different things and bottlenecks and whatnot that comes up during implementation. So focus on your implementation. With that said, implementation doesn't matter either if you don't consider this a culture change, because it is a culture change. If you're getting everybody to work on one page and things are going to come up, what do they do about it? Do they bring it up to the meeting or to the group and it gets routed through the process and they end up getting some sort of response? And or do they bring it up and they're ignored and the process just goes on with the people who are running the process and they're oblivious to what all the further extended participants are thinking? Well, that process may look great, but it's probably not going to work very long. So it's a culture change. It's a way of doing business. As my HR mentor used to say, it begins and ends with leadership. So it has to start at the top. That does not mean that I think that the CEO or the P&L business owner has to be the one putting this together. That's not at all I'm saying. But they need to be involved and signing off on, they agree to whatever decisions they're making and they live by them. They don't leave the meeting and 10 minutes later make a different decision. That's not going to work, because now we've got everyone happy, and that's the best way to make everyone even unhappier than they were before, because now they thought they had a voice and it's just been squashed. That's not good. And so you have, the SIOP team is important. It's a vehicle for having a say, like I said. Typically speaking, I try to do a pilot month, which means you use the real data, so it just means your first month, but you're testing the process out and getting people comfortable with it and not getting too crazy about the results and, being too hard on everybody, but you get going, get some momentum going. And then you typically need some kind of data support, but I've worked with the worst systems, I guarantee you, that you've probably ever seen. And we even were able to do SIOP with them. So it helps to have somebody who will get you some data. But if you don't have it, you can still go on. So with that said, we have a few minutes left. I would like to see if anyone has any questions. Like I said, as opposed to going on further on case studies, I think I'd rather answer some questions. So I don't know, Kate or Maggie, can we see if anyone has any questions?
I am looking right now, Lisa, and thank you for that presentation, and I do not see any questions at this time. Perhaps we should give them a couple of minutes. If you can
are they able to do they have to type them or do they have to say them?
Type them, or I can open up the phones if you wish to do it verbally. Would you like me to do that?
Yeah, why don't we do it? I mean, we may as well give it a try. Nobody has any questions? No? Kate, you have a question. No, go ahead. No? All right, well, I can... Does anybody have a question? Nope. All right. Well, then I guess Maggie, we can mute it again, and I will give him a case study or something.
Okay. Everybody is muted.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you. And if you have questions, type them in, and we'll if you get them to me while we're still on the webinar, I'll answer. If not, if Maggie can get them to me, I'll answer them after the webinar. So let's see. I have a few, but I'm certainly not going to go through all these case studies. But one of the things that I could that I think I'll bring up is one of the interesting ones that I was thinking about was a building products manufacturer, and they had pretty stable volume. Like, it was pretty predictable, really. It was actually the most predictable I've ever seen throughout my entire career. However, it was not predictable on on a daily basis because sales had some big spikes thrown into the mix. And as I said, in building products, it's really critical that you deliver rapidly. So what would happen is that even though their business was the most predictable I've ever seen, hands down, in any business, it was unpredictable on a daily basis. And we wanted to be able to reduce costs, but that's challenging to do when you don't know what you're going to have until it happens. And most importantly, if you had this big sales spike, although they had high service levels, they would drop down maybe into the low 90s, which really wasn't helpful to growing the business. And we wanted to be able to respond faster. So we were able to put together a SIOP process where we did, lay out their demand, and we could see that it was quite predictable over time. But the problem was that it was also seasonal, and they had a lot of temporary employees, which a lot of businesses do. So if they waited to the spikes to respond, there's just no way that you can bring in a temp and have them be functional. As we probably all know, temps can't. There's a lot of money in employee turnover, and let alone temp turnover. There's quality issues and a lot of other things because, of course, they're not up to speed. So they had a lot of turnover that way. And so what we did is we predicted the demand. We looked at it more on a quarterly basis, which is really stable. And then we said, hey, let's keep our staffing between this level and that level, because if we do that, we should not overreact when it's a slower period of time, even though we might be tempted because it seems like we're spending more money than we need to be spending, and why would anybody want to do that? However, when the spikes come, then we can't respond, and we have to spend twice as much money trying to figure out how to respond, and it's frustrating. So we ended up putting in some processes to keep staffing, because they really didn't have a machinery issue. They had the capacity availability. It was more of staffing and timing. Of course, it's harder to find people depending upon what shift you're trying to run it during. There's other complications added into the mix in their case as well. It was hot in the facility, and who would like to work during the heat of the day when it's really, really hot, like it has been this week. So we were able to better predict that and keep a more stable level of resources that we thought would, maybe even turn into a higher cost, but it would provide us with a more stable system. And what happened is we were able to prove out that we actually saved money, but more importantly, we were able to respond quicker to the spike. So like when we would go from 98, 99% service level down to 90 or something, 92, we may still have to respond to those spikes, because in their case, the spikes were pretty spiky, if you will. The time frame it took was cut in half. So meaning like we were down at 92% for half the amount of time that we were previously. So that's pretty awesome, because then our customers were much happier. They didn't have to suffer with the spike nearly as long, and our employees were happier because it was more predictable, and we were able to save money. So that's the kind of idea that you can achieve with SIOP, and that's a very different example from many of the other ones that I could give you about improving service levels and where we had really dramatic swings in sales. And then you have a whole different set of equations to deal with. But in the end, it still relates to how do you align your demand with your supply. How do you align all the different areas of the business on one page, in essence? And you got to maintain that. And even getting your customers and suppliers, maybe not directly, but getting them more aligned too. And a lot of that has to do with you, not them. So that was one example. Let's see. So looking at this page, I'm assuming Maggie will tell me if you get the question, but there's the SIOP work with Lean. I would say that that's one example. That's something that sometimes folks think, oh, they're not going to work together. It actually works really well. It's taking the right elements of different tools out of your toolkit. It's kind of like, you know, in the old days of fixing cars. You know, if everything is if you know how to use one tool, you might think that everything looks like that should be the one you use, but it's not necessarily true. You might be able to fix it, but it could take you 3 times as long. So it's taking the right tools out of your toolkit, and they actually can be very complementary. Even demand planning or forecasting, which seems like it's the opposite of lean, which is, you know, running exactly to your customer orders as they come in. They are not. They can work very complementary with one another. So anyway, so that's answering one of the questions. And we'll wrap up here with, it's not all about the data or technology. It's not even all about it. It's very rarely at all the key feature. I already talked about balancing demand and supply. You want to make one common plan, establish quick wins, remember that it's a culture change, and results are going to happen. So with that said, I wanted to give you my contact information if you have questions, or for the people who listen to this online, if you drop me an email, I'll be happy to answer your questions. And I'll also I'll also add you to my newsletters like Supply Chain Briefing as a thank you for participating in the webinar. All right, is there any last anything